And this clip shows up a lot in the toxic aspects of the manosphere, more often than you'd think. When you go and look at videos and TikToks and YouTube shorts that are trying to speak to people who value masculinity and people who might even be rabidly misogynistic, this clip comes up a lot. All right, guys, it's time to talk about Jordan Peterson, but not about him freaking out about penguin walking. That is a more recent phenomenon. No, I want to talk instead about an older situation that happened with Jordan Peterson, because I recently made a video about men's issues and the ways that we tend to go about handling them, or mishandling them rather. And the way that we speak when it comes to men's issues tends to lead a lot of people to leave left-wing progressive spaces and move into right-wing progressive right-wing anti-progressive spaces, because people are talking to them. People are speaking in a way that resonates with them. And that's a thing that we need to get better about addressing here on the left. So while I was doing some research for covering these topics, I found a specific moment between Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan that showed up a lot on the more manosphere sides of YouTube. And it's an interesting one because the formula is always this. There's a video that will slowly go over like a handful of celebrations of what you would consider manhood, and then it will have music playing in the background that is very, very moody, very dun 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 dun, and it has a whole resonance where if somebody were to just look at the video in itself, they would immediately go, "Oh, this is just speaking to me and my masculinity and all that other fun stuff." And in those, there's always a handful of clips that always show up. This clip between Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan is one of the ones that I saw more often than not. So we're going to talk about it, talk about some of the ways in which things are said that are correct, and some of the ways in which things are said that are very incorrect, and some of the ways in which we can appropriate bad ideas that are had by good ideas that are had by bad people and shape them into something a little more positive. But before we get into any of that at all, we need to get into the fan art section. So, with that said, the very first piece of fan art we are going to be talking about today is from Sylvia Silica. And it's this one right. Sylvia said, "Sunday streams means only one thing, wholesome content. And we are all wholesome, aren't we? So we have a nun Suris in various states of garb." So apparently, Sylvia Silica really wants me to have a nun outfit at some point because of this. With that said, the next piece of fan art we have is from Dyslexic Cowum. I almost read that as Cowcoom, and that was terrible. But look at the detail on this piece. Look at the detail on this piece. So I think I started this about a year ago. The Dark Magician Suris from another artist was so cute that I couldn't get it out of my head. So this is based off one of the Dark Magician Girl figures I really liked. At the time, I was entirely new to digital art, so I've used this as practice. Every time I learned something new, I came back to it until I ended up with something I liked enough to post. Poor thing has been edited and reworked to hell and back again. Now that I've finally managed to overcome my not knowing shit about computers-itis and figured out how to get on Discord, I'll work on finishing the other art to post here. I really hope this is how things are supposed to work. So, yes, Dyslexic Cowum, this is exactly how things work. You make a fan art piece, you throw it in the fan art section on Discord, and then we get to look at it and go, "Oh my god, look at this piece. It looks fantastic." Because it does. This piece looks great, and I'm glad that you've basically been I like every time I hear from any artist that like they decided, "Hey, I'm gonna use Suris as a canvas to learn things about art." I fucking love that. So keep doing what you're doing, keep improving in your craft. You show a lot of good stuff already. But with that all said, guys, as always, thank you all for dropping in your fan art into the fan art section of the Discord. If you want yours to be shown, then go ahead and drop fan art into that section. We'll talk about it there. But the most important thing you can be doing right now is hitting the subscribe button and the bell notification icon. And because I'm recording this on YouTube, I can say that directly to the people on YouTube. Suck it! Oh, but also, thank you for watching the video. We're gonna get into things. We're gonna get right into things.
So because people have commented on every verse in the Bible, like, to a degree that's almost unimaginable. So you can look and see all the interpretations and all the translations and get some sense of what the genuine meaning might be. And the line, the meek shall inherit the earth, meek is not a good translation, or the word has moved in the 300 years or so since it was translated. What it means is this: those who have swords and know how to use them, but keep them sheathed, will inherit the world. And that's another thing I've been telling. Yeah, no kidding. That's a lot different, man. That's a big difference. It's so great. And so, like, one of the things I tell young men, well, and young women as well, but the young men really need to hear this more, I think, is that you should be a monster. You know, because everyone says, well, you should be harmless, virtuous. You shouldn't do anyone any harm. You should sheath your competitive instinct. You shouldn't try to win. You know, you don't want to be too aggressive. You don't want to be too assertive. You want to take a back seat and all of that. It's like, no. Wrong. You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
Do you know the expression, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war?
Right, exactly. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. And so when I tell young men that, they think, well, lots of them are competitive. They're low in agreeableness, you know, because that's part of being competitive temperamentally. It's like, is there something wrong with being competitive? There's nothing wrong with it. There's something wrong with cheating. There's something wrong with being a tyrant. There's something wrong with winning unfairly. All of those things are bad, but you don't want people to win? What's the difference between trying to win and striving? You want to eradicate striving?
Well, it's the uncomfortable.
So that's the entirety of the clip that, and this clip shows up a lot in the toxic aspects of the manosphere, more often than you'd think. When you go and look at videos and TikToks and YouTube shorts that are trying to speak to people who value masculinity and people who might even be rabidly misogynistic, this clip comes up a lot. So, why? What parts of this resonate with people? Well, one of them is what Jordan Peterson is saying here is technically correct. There has been a concerted effort to get people to be more agreeable and less competitive over the last few years. This has been one of the things we've talked about when we talk about toxic masculinity. The idea that men are too competitive, or masculinity as a concept leads people to be so competitive that they end up fighting each other. They end up competing and not cooperating. And there's a truth to that. There's a huge truth to that. We do need to be better at cooperation. But I think the thing that gets missed here from Jordan, Peterson, because he misses a lot of shit, is that nobody is saying that men shouldn't be competitive or that people shouldn't be competitive. We still want competition. We just think that people need to be better at cooperation. But here's the thing. If you've been seeing the trend of people needing to be more cooperative and less competitive over the course of the last few years, when you hear this, you hear something that resonates with you. You hear something that speaks to you. And because that's what Jordan Peterson's a good rhetorician. You may not agree with the things he says. I don't agree with 90% of the shit he says. But he is able to effectively get people to listen to him and take him seriously. He is skilled at rhetoric, and it is important to recognize when your enemies are skilled at rhetoric, because if you accept that they're skilled at rhetoric, then you will get better at rhetoric to beat them. Recognize when people you don't like are good at a thing, and it will make you improve at the thing. That is a major point that we need to start doing. We can clown on Jordan Peterson. We can do it all the time. He's still a well-spoken person. I said, why beat them? Oh, very, very simple. Very, very simple. So when people listen to Jordan Peterson a lot, there's a tendency for them to slide down what's called the alt-right pipeline, the alt-right rabbit hole. And that leads to them listening to more people like Andrew Tate, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh. This leads them to listening to, at the lowest echelons, it used to lead to them listening to people like Richard Spencer, who was an out-and-out Nazi, is an out-and-out Nazi. When people start on this rabbit train, or Jordan Peterson is almost always one of the first stops on the way down there. because he hangs around in those circles, that, quote, intellectual dark web, as it were. At least that's what we used to call it a couple of years ago. Why should we, as progressive people, be trying to beat these people? Because by and large, progressivism does not espouse the same levels of cruelty that people like Jordan Peterson will end up causing people to espouse. People like Jordan that lead into the Shapiros and the Walshes. The people who are in those spaces tend to celebrate cruelty and meanness and harming people and begin voting on policies and politicians that will harm people and constantly do so. There is value in pulling people away from those toxic spaces, and there is value in learning the rhetoric of people who are on that side of politics so we can figure out what is working for them and why it is working. So, let's take a statement that Jordan Peterson said that drips of toxic masculinity and some of the worst aspects of, well, again, masculinity, and let's reshape it into something better for the left. The statement was, you should be a monster and then learn how to control that monster. The essence of that statement is men are supposed to protect, quote unquote, that's what Jordan believes. And because they're supposed to protect, you can't protect anybody by being meek. You protect them by being able to be aggressive, be a monster, be able to be a defender or an assailant when the situation asks for you. There is a way to take that sentiment and use it for good, because it's technically a true statement. If you move that sentiment away from men and just keep it as a conversation about masculinity, which doesn't necessarily have to center around men. There are masculine women. There are masculine non-binary people. There are people that exude that energy regardless of gender. So how can we reshape that statement in a way that is not harmful, that does not, that communicates the same idea, but communicates it in a positive way that does not lead people agreeing with Jordan? Well, when Jordan argues, when Peterson argues that you should be a monster, he is asking you to take on monstrosity as a part of your identity. I would argue instead that you should have a monster in your pocket. That is you should have it as a tool. The specific phrasing of this, I ended up getting from my friend Ocean, the monster in your pocket bit. Mine was just using it as a tool. I think monstrosity is a tool. I think the ability to tap into that aggressiveness when it is needed can be used to defend your loved ones, can be used to defend yourself, can be used to protect that which is valuable to you. Think about any time a bigot has been online and has said something untoward to you or a loved one. The version of yourself that comes out is either impotent or monstrous. It is either something that is threatening or something that is seen as pitiable. You cannot protect that loved one or that person if that thing is seen as pitiable. And you don't want an army of those people who exude that pitiability if we're all in the middle of an armed protest together and we are all relying on each other to have each other's backs. And there is always a chance of that happening because we saw that happen quite a lot during the BLM protests. You want a group of people that can have a monster in their pocket as a tool they have access to protect themselves and their fellow human being. What you don't want is for them to take that tool and make it their identity. When Jordan Peterson argues for this, he argues, make the monster part of your identity, internalize it into yourself, and then from there, learn to control that thing. Always be on the precipice. I would argue that taking the sentiment of needing access to that monstrosity and making it a tool you have in your belt is infinitely more healthy than taking that as part of your identity. And by arguing this, we are able to take the core idea that people who are obsessed with masculinity are grabbing onto. We can take that core idea that they like, and we can repurpose it into something that is not only healthier for them to utilize, but also will allow us to speak to these people in a way that is on their level, with their language, using the same tools people like Peterson is using, but bring them over to the left instead of letting them slide down the right. And I know there's 1,000 Pokemon jokes you can make about keeping a monster in your pocket. I've been trying not to make them, but everybody in chat has been making them the whole time. But the fact of the matter is, as I've said in the other video that I did on how the left handles masculinity and the ways in which we fail, there is a reason that we see a lot of people who have the macho guys persona. There's a reason we see so many of them slide into right-wing rhetoric, and it's because people like Jordan Peterson, people like Joe Rogan, people like Matt Walsh, people like Andrew Tate, they're taking that language and they're using it to shape those people into weapons. They are using it to shape those people into an audience that serves their needs, whatever those needs may be. We, as people on the left, need to be taking that strategy and understanding how it works mechanically, and then making good from it. I see that the masculinity thing appeals to X person. Okay, cool. How do I communicate that in such a way that they feel heard over this thing that is important to them, but also I don't enable the toxic parts of masculinity, the toxicity that can cause them issues? We need to recognize that there are aspects of masculinity in culture that are not a problem. Most people can recognize that. That's a pretty obvious thing to recognize. But simply recognizing it isn't enough. Celebrating it is important. Because the right wing celebrates that shit. They celebrate that shit, and then people who are on the fence slide down that pipeline because they feel like they're important. They start feeling almost love-bombed by the right wing. Also, Ice Blossom, thank you for the follow. And then they get taken advantage of. And then they get used as weapons against us. Then they become the people that bolster the Twitter armies and the 4chan boards and, yes, even the voting booths that allow anti-progressive legislation to push forward and be more prominent. I've said it before. We've got more anti-trans bills than we have days in the United States right now, which is a really interesting thing. We've also got more mass shootings than we have days in the United States right now. We're really good at two things: hating minorities and shooting people. Those are two things we're good at in America, and we need to fix that shit. We fix that shit a lot of times with legislation, but we can't get that legislation if we can't get the numbers. We don't get the numbers if we don't convince people to be on a different side than the one they're on. So, I said it in a different video, I'll say it again. Learn what makes people slide down the alt-right pipeline. Use those techniques for good, because I guarantee you the worst people in the world are using those techniques for bad. We have a very, 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 very poor habit on the left of pretending that there's no such thing as a bad tactic, only a bad target. No, there are good and bad tactics. Targets matter just as much as anything else, but we need to get better at using better tactics, because by using better tactics, we can get people on our side who otherwise wouldn't be. And you need those numbers, because that's how you get votes and legislation. That's how you scare politicians into changing the way that they write laws. You have to change the opinion of a country slowly over time. And you don't do that by not listening to a majority of your population. But with that said, I wanted to go over this clip. I didn't want to go over a lot of it, but I wanted to go over the idea presented here. The idea of take this thing that someone like Jordan Peterson said that is obviously speaking to people, that is obviously resonating with people, reshape it into something positive while keeping the core idea there, and use that in your own movement so that you don't keep losing people to the movement that demonstrably causes harm. But with that said, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already. And as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here.